When does it start? Okay. All right. Good luck.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mandar. I work at CWI Amsterdam. And today I want to share with you a project that I've been working on for the past couple of years. It's called DynaML. And it's a Scala research environment for machine learning, a BAS terminal for end-to-end data science, and a scalable and extensible API. So how does it do that? So it has its essential modular structure. We have API section for models, evaluation, learning in terms of probabilistic inference, as well as optimization. But the part I really want to stress today is it gives you the ability to create workflows and pipe them together. So there's a whole library of workflows you can do for data pre-processing, and you can join them together to create complex data processing pipelines. So in models, for example, there is currently support for feed-forward neural networks and the generalized linear models and model ensembles. But where it has a really developed API is in kernel-based models like least-squared support vector machines and Gaussian processes. And all the models fit into a kind of coherent hierarchy. And the model logic is decoupled from the pre-processing using workflows. And of course, you have basic visualization of your results. So a very simple example, you can create a very simple workflow in the shell by just using the workflow library. For example, we want to load a file into a stream, trim the leading white spaces, replace them with commas or something like that, extract the training features so you can give column indexes, and there's an option for missing values. Sorry. And then, of course, apply that workflow on an actual file, and voila, you see the result. And after you have that in a particular variable, you can, let's say, load it into a general regression model, or OLS, and tell it to learn, and then, of course, visualize the parameters and do all sorts of activities after that. So if you want to write your own models in DynaML, there's a whole model hierarchy, but the bare minimum is that your model needs to have some training data and basic predict functionality. And of course, scalability. So there is in-house support for Apache Spark. You can load a Spark context, create your own RDDs, and actually use them in model training. And of course, if you have LAPACK and ARPAC installed on your system, DynaML uses NetLive Java to directly access that and speed up vector calculations. So any of you interested can head over to the GitHub repo and the user guide, and don't hesitate to use and contribute. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vesna. I'm at the University of Hamburg, and I work on using deep learning for galaxy classification. And the reason why we want to do this is that it allows us to learn about the evolution of the universe, because certain types of galaxies existed at certain times. But to do this by eye, it's very time-consuming and tedious. And instead, if we recognize that classification of galaxies based on a few simple rules, then it lends itself very naturally to machine learning. And with galaxy images, it's mainly been done with optical images, but one of the aims of my PhD project is to apply the methods to classify radio galaxy images. And you may be aware of the Kaggle Galaxy Zoo competition, where the aim of the competition was to get the competitors to predict what the users would classify galaxies as. And the winner of this solution used the convolutional neural networks, so we thought it would be a good idea. And originally, neural networks are very slow and difficult to train because you stack the layers together, all the nodes are interconnected. So it ends up having like a small gradient or big gradient, but then if you use a certain number of filters with a convolutional nets that are connected to a smaller portion, it becomes a lot more faster to train. And deep learning is very suited to galaxy classification because it's image data. It doesn't require so much pre-processing. You can use image augmentation to generate more data by performing simple translations. You set up a model with a few parameters, and your network adjusts by changing the weights and biases. So I've been using the Dielemann's solution to experiment with and learn from, but I've converted the probability vector into a set of classifications such as spiral, elliptical, and I also used an activation function that wasn't available at the time, the PRELU, and I wanted to explore simple architectures such as these to get some more insight into how they work and why you add the layers that you add. So with one convolutional, one pooling layer, it's not enough. You don't get many features detected or hardly any, and it doesn't do anything. With two convolutional, two pooling layers, it detects more features and considerably lower training loss. And then you get to the winning solution. You see all the 3 layers detect features now, and it gives the lowest training loss. So it works very well. And I found that as you increase the number of layers, it tends to increase the classification accuracy, it gives more stable losses, but you don't want to add more layers than is necessary because then you overfit. And although the PRELU seems to perform better than the RELU, it actually makes overfitting worse. And we've learned some very good valuable insights to classify radio galaxies from this.
Hi everyone, it's a bit stressful. I'm going to try something I haven't done before, which is ask, in regards to driving and traffic accidents, how many people have ever actually been involved in a traffic accident on the road? Maybe a third. And how many people have actually ever been involved in a near-miss accident, so had to brake to avoid another car, or like seen someone had to swerve? Okay, so some. So for the rest of the presentation, this is going to be historical accidents that have actually happened and then near-miss accidents which nearly happened. The aim of my research is to be able to make driving safer by learning from these sort of events. So events that have happened previously, these historical accidents, and ones that nearly happened. So detecting these with either vehicle data, like computers in the car, or smartphone data, so while you're using your Navi system. So with historical data, this is a map of Switzerland, and in the last 4 years, there have been just over 250,000 traffic accidents, and we have a heat map. What we did is we applied DB-scan, a density-based clustering algorithm, in order to identify historically dangerous hotspots of traffic accidents. These are shown in signs. As you can see, there's some different types of signs. Hopefully you can see that. And this is because the historical data from Switzerland, it's very rich. You get the reasons why the accidents occurred. And it should change in a second to Lausanne, hopefully, where you'll hopefully be able to see a slightly more zoomed in picture. So you can see, for example, some roundabouts, some traffic lights. These give contextual information as to why these accidents actually happened. Now, the theme of the conference is applied machine learning. So what we did is we actually took these warnings and we wanted to put them in the car in order to try and make driving safer for people. So how did we do this? We had a smartphone application, and as people actually approached these dangerous areas, we provided these warnings to people. And we were able to show that over time, as the drivers experienced these warnings more and more, they drove safer and they had less of these near-miss kind of accidents. So less heavy braking events. Now, one thing we realized when we were looking at this is that actually this data from the vehicle that we were measuring could be used to potentially predict the locations of these accident hotspots. So the example here is a swerving accident, so swerving around this particularly dangerous corner. We can detect this with data you can get from the car and from the smartphone accelerometer. We ran a 5-month field study with 72 vehicles and just over 700,000 kilometers driven. And the aim is to use this driving data that we collected in order to identify dangerous areas. You can hopefully see just 3 examples where car accident data, these little red dots, correlate very strongly with the historical ones. However, the current problem I'm facing is how to prove this. How do we actually compare clustering results from 2 different data sets which should align? So if anyone has any suggestions on this or any questions regarding the project, we'd be very happy to speak to you at the end after these presentations. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's right.
Hi everyone. So I will give you an overview of another real-time application of machine learning in the industry. So it's on display advertising. So basically what we are doing, most of the time when we display a web page, it triggers a set of real-time auctions on the ad servers just to decide which ads would be displayed on the web pages. As Criteo, we help our partners with the advertisers to decide what product and what ads we should display for the users. And we do it at a huge scale. Those are some of the numbers. We have to process like 20 billion requests per day, so that's huge. And we have to answer very quickly, so this will have a huge impact on the models that we have to design. Where is the machine learning in this? So those are the 3 steps where we use machine learning. The first one is the bidding strategy. So it means what is the value we should bid to the servers for a given bid request. Second one is recommendation. What are the products we would like to include in the banners? And the last one is the colors, for example, of the banners. So the first one, the most important, is bidding strategy. So in most of the cases, we face what we call second price auction. And in this case, it's very simple. If we estimate kind of probability of clicks or probability of conversions, then we have the optimal strategy. So we can do this using simple supervised learning. The second stage is a classical product recommendation, but we have the constraints that the catalogs we are facing are huge. So we have to divide this step in 2 parts, an offline collaborative filtering-based approach, and then an online classical ranking based on supervised learning approach. So this is the kind of data we are dealing with. Number of training data points, like the order of magnitude is 1 billion. Dimensionality of the feature space is around 10 million, roughly. And we have usually unbalanced data sets. And there is no more screen here. Yeah. So in those typical cases, general linear models are very well suited, especially because they scale well and they can answer very fast. How did we do that? In practice, we implemented, I'm lucky because this one is not changing. Oh yeah, it changed. So we implemented an in-house machine learning library on top of Hadoop and Spark, basically. So it's classical optimization, stochastic gradient descent, and second-order method, for example. And this is quite, it scales very well. Of course, we are not only doing supervised learning, and we have many different interesting projects in the pipeline. And one of them is going beyond supervised learning using reinforcement learning, to try to optimize the bidding strategy a bit better than we are doing today, and also many learnings on graphs. And the more important part is probably this one. If you want to play with our data, we released quite a lot of data sets that are linked here. And if you want also some collaborations, we are quite open on this topic. So feel free to go to those links or drop me an email if you want.
So I hope that I won't be kicked out after you show the next slide from EPFL. So, okay, I'm sure that all of you are thinking about changing the world almost every day, right? But there are those small kind of obstacles that prevent you from doing this. That is being Westworld, or maybe you cause a sofa in the living room. So, but you know that Westworld or cause a sofa can prevent you from clicking the sign button under the petition. But what actually makes the difference when we look at the campaigns that motivate 4 million or 4 people to sign the petition? So in this work, we are trying to develop the actionable framework or model that accurately mimic the time evolution of the petition signatures. So for this framework to actually be useful for online activism, it's also important both for model and the results be interpretable. So apart from actually looking at signature time series in isolation, we also try to look at 2 additional sources of information, one being the Twitter data, the social media data, and second being the information from the petition platform itself, that is whether a petition was promoted on the front page or not. As you might know, applying classical time series techniques on online data is rather challenging. As web data tend to have lots of data quality issues, and is often incomplete, noisy, or poorly aligned. At the same time, it's important to notice that, for accurate prediction, that both successful and failed petitions are usually hard to distinguish, especially in the initial phases, and especially if we look at the time series data from signatures only. Then it's also important to notice that both social media data and the petition signatures exhibit strong circadian nature and also aging with time. So the intensity of the time series for these signatures kind of tend to decay. So considering all the observation, we propose a model which kind of nicely for us mimic the seasonality effect, which includes the amplitude, intensity, the phase estimation, as well as some initial boost and the decay in the end. Moreover, as I mentioned, we'll look at 3 additional components, being reach gets richer effect, which we call as self-excitation. Second one being social media effect in the form of Twitter postings, and the ranking from the front page. This kind of notion gives us the opportunity to estimate both all of these components as an influence function and see how it affects the signature rates. So finally, you're gonna see some example of the hourly signature distribution, hopefully, but because it's kind of slightly got stuck. Yeah, it was like the screen became black, but now it's good again. But the main message, so this is basically the hourly signature pattern of some typical petition. The message is basically that our model is kind of good when we include also the social media component and perform the best to consider comparing to lots of other criteria. So if you actually want to make the difference and excite more than 4 people, like you might have seen on the first slide, you can pass by my poster and I can tell you some more details how to do it. Otherwise, if you're more on the Westworld sofa node, you can check our upcoming www paper. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm starting a PhD here at EPFL, and I am pleased to introduce to you a pilot study that we did that aimed to predict polygenic traits using neural networks. So classical study has mostly focused on the physical features that are monogenic. Monogenic means that one version of a gene, a genotype, will be linked to one physical feature. A phenotype. For example, if hair color is monogenic, if you have the ginger hair gene, you will have a ginger hair. If you have brown hair gene, you will be brown hair. More recent study focused on polygenic traits, and in this case, many genotypes will be underlying the phenotype. For example, if our hair color were working as a beloved RGB system, 3 genes will be adding to each other and interacting to define your hair color. The problem with this kind of genetic architecture is rely on the complexity of the genome itself. It's 3 billion nucleotides long, and because we are only interested in the difference between individuals, we will only consider hotspot of variation, which are single nucleotide polymorphism, SNPs. And doing this, we will drop from 3 billion to 300,000, but it's still huge. And because of this reason, most classical techniques only estimate the additive effect of each SNP taken separately. And this estimate is what we call narrow sense heritability. By contrast, broad sense heritability takes into account this interaction. And what we wanted to see if whether or not neural network can estimate this broad sense heritability. So we run a pilot study on 1,000 samples, and we try to estimate height, which is a classical polygenic traits. We try different neural architecture, and we stick with a multi-layer perceptron, which has 700 neurons as input, which are SNPs known to be associated with height, and 2 hidden fully connected layers. This is our result. You can see on the left that the multi-layer perceptron is clustering in result in 3 classes. And doing this, it raised a broad sense heritability of 7.8%, and we compared it with more classical techniques such as multiple linear regression or lasso, and it raised narrow sense heritability of 1.8 or 4.8. Next, we compute the polygenic risk score thanks to a huge study of 200,000 individuals. We then got narrow sense irritability of 18%, but it's not directly comparable with what we had because there is here 200 times more samples. But it gives us the motivation to do one step further, and we contacted UK Biobank that has 100,000 of samples, and we will rerun our analysis with it. Another step further would be to make the SNP data more semantic by using, for example, the annotation available in the encyclopedia of DNA element, or by downloading the sequence surrounding each SNPs. Finally, CrowdAI is opening a challenge that will aim to predict AIDS thanks to the data available thanks to OpenSNPs. OpenSNP is a platform where individuals can share their genotypic information for research purpose, and it will be the data that will be provided for the challenger. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Naomi. I'm working at the IDIAP Research Institute, and I'm working on the project Tact Hand. So our goal is to improve the control of prosthetic hands, and to do so we want to use tactile sensors and realistic machine learning. So what is usually done to control prosthetic hands is that we have a prosthetics and we have SEMG sensors that measure the electrical activity of the muscles. We collect the data from the SEMG, and with that we do some classification of poses. So we have poses like unopen, and close, or finger pointing, stuff like that. So the drawback of these approaches is that the SEMG are often unstable, and we have lots of muscles packed side to side in the arm, so there is lots of noise. And classification is not really good for this type of data, because there is lots of states between two poses of the hand. No. So to improve the control of prosthetic hand, the first thing we propose is to add some sensors. So we add a tactile bracelet to compensate the drawback of SEMG. So with that, we have two types of data, tactile array data and SEMG data, and we want to fuse them to have more data to do the regression. So the step after is that we want to do regression while taking the structure of the data in account. So we want to represent our tactile array data in tensor form and to do multilinear algebra with them. So we want to apply tensor methods to do the regression with our data from the tactile bracelets. The other thing we want to do is to use the geometry of the data. So for that, we use some regression methods on Riemannian manifold. So Riemannian manifolds are some mathematical spaces that are only locally Euclidean, like a sphere in 3 dimensions. So you have only the tangent space that is Euclidean, and we can do some Gaussian mixture regression with that. We did an experiment, so we have someone with a tactile bracelet. There is some hand pose on a screen, and the person has to reproduce the stimulus. So we did 6 different movements: index and little finger flexion, thumb rotation, and wrist flexion and extension, and supination, that is the rotation. We used some tensor Gaussian process regression to do the regression between our data and the poses. So the kernel between two tensors is given by the equation that is on the up. XM is the matricization of the tensor X, and we use 2 different distances, Kullback-Leibler divergence and symmetric positive definite Euclidean distance. We compared our method with the classical ridge regression and the Gaussian process with the classical RBF kernel, and what we can see on the results is that the tensor Gaussian process with the Kullback-Leibler divergence give most of the time the best results for the movement. So we can conclude that the structure of the data is useful. So for the future work, we want to fuse the SEMG and tactile information for the regression. We want to develop efficient online regression methods and to do some tests with the real prosthetists and amputees. So if you want more information, you can go on the IDIAP website that is on the down of the slide. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Aristotelis, senior scientist at the University of Applied Sciences at Sierra, Switzerland. I'm going to talk to you about machine learning and application in medtech. So, okay, so you include also my initial title. Okay, so to put you in the context in this application, what we have a medical device, which looks like in the figure on the left is like a contact lens that has a strain gauge that measures deformations on the corneoscleral part of the eye, and these are somehow related to the intraocular pressure. And in this case, if this goes too high, let's say, then we can have a disease that is called glaucoma. So this device takes measurements that look like in the figure here. We have measurements every 5 minutes, duration of 30 seconds, and we do that in a 24-hour period of time. So in this case, we see that this disease is an important disease in cardiovascular, important disease in the problems in the eye. More about 80 million people that have problems. What we want to do here is to develop a machine learning platform to use this data and provide some information, some tools to the medical doctors in order to get decisions about the progression, for example, of the disease. So what we develop is we use this data, then we want to translate the disease. We want to make this from the business side to develop a machine learning formulations and to do different things from defining features, doing a classification and clustering. As we see here, we see a workflow of a procedure for doing a classification in which we do cross-validation. So we start from an initial set, then we do the cross-validation, we have the training set, test set, and at the end we get some scores. For example, we do ROC curves and we get the area under the curve. Here we see a list of some keywords of the methods that we applied. I'm sure most of you know most of these methods that are in like dynamic type warping, support vector machines, etc. So one important thing was, of course, to develop these methods, but most important for this kind of disease was to understand exactly what it means glaucoma and what it means actually progression of the disease, and what we mean that how we can, let's say, cluster the people in different progression of the disease, if it is a fast progression or slow progression, and this may have a different way that we can manage actually the disease, and the tools that we develop are adapted to that. So we see here the added value to the company, which was actually a better understanding of the disease that gave them some new business opportunities. Actually, they have more and more increased interest from medical doctors that participate and collaborate with them and also advise them in the disease. They are planning now new clinical trials, and they also got the FDA approval. So I would like to thank the University of Applied Sciences of Freiburg, who work also in that project, the Swiss Confederation, the CTI, for supporting the project, and finally, I would like to thank SenseMed for their trust working with us and for their collaboration. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Enkelida and I'm working in biosystems at ETH Zurich. I'm going to talk to you today about another healthcare application, specifically the immune response. So the immune response actually is made of antibodies. Antibody is something that comes up when you have an infection or an influenza, for example, and the immune response is made of this antibody repertoire that is a collection of antibody sequences. They are all different, they are all large. And the way of studying this immune response is networks, as this is a way of studying actually in general complex systems, so very large systems. There are particular challenges that haven't made it possible to study the comprehensive similarity of the sequences, and those are specifically subsampling, for example. The analysis that is only one dimension, so basically you only measure one amino acid differences between the different antibody sequences. And we have then, and the computational complexity, so that's why we have developed high-performance computing in order to actually reduce the time and make it possible to construct very large-scale networks of millions of nodes in only about 10 minutes. This has empowered us to look more specifically to 3 dimensions of the antibody repertoire response. For example, the reproducibility of the structure, the robustness to the deletion of several clones of several antibodies, and the redundancy. So how can you predict the other differences between the sequences of antibody repertoires if you know one layer, so one difference? And we have discovered that the structure is reproducible. It's basically exponential before immunization, and it's power law after immunization. So it means that you have an immune response that is centered in specific sequences, so that are all similar to one sequence that is specific and is binding to one pathogen, like a virus or a bacteria. We have discovered that these antibody repertoires are very robust, so they are robust to 50% of deletion of several clones, so that's why you are still immune, actively immune, and you are surviving several infections. But clones that are shared between individuals are very important in the architecture. Those clones you shouldn't touch or remove from the antibody repertoire. And we have also discovered that antibody repertoire is redundant. It means that from the one amino acid differences, you can predict the other layers of differences between your antibody sequences. So basically, the evolution has hard-coded the response in your most simple layer of differences. And the conclusion is that this high-performance computing platform will be open source soon, and the structure is reproducible, robust, and redundant, and this has a significance for personalized medicine in order to predict and modify the immune response that each individual can have to particular bacteria. I'd like to thank my professor, Sayer Reddy, and Victor Grive that contributed to this project, and would love to also show you that there is a systems conference we are organizing in Ascona, and if you are interested in antibody repertoires, machine learning applied to them, please register. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Chen Haocui, and I'm from Statistical Science Department of University College of London. So I'm carrying out PhD research on the topic of multivariate calibration for spectroscopic analysis. So the main application of this method is in food industry. So in some sense, we are not now talking about the artificial food. So basically, we apply image analysis methods on some food material, and we are trying to predict the quality and safety parameter of some food material like wheat, coffee beans, and maize, where we can control the safety, which is important, and we can gain value from better understanding of the quality. But the image here is slightly different. It's not visible picture, but invisible near-infrared spectrum taken from food material. And you can see it's continuous variable, and after proper denosing and normalization, we feed that into a regression algorithm. And the very classical, the feature of this kind of calibration method is you can see it's high dimensional in input space, and the input variables are highly correlated because spectrum change very slowly, and we try to predict on some continuous constituents, which means we are looking at a regression problem. The very classical treatment is a single linear model, where we do dimension reduction first with principal component analysis, for example, and then feed that into a least square regression. And the limitation is that it's too simple and too weak, and sometimes we waste information on large data sets. The alternative approach, for example, is kernel methods, like SVM or Gaussian process regression. We do dimension reduction at first as the same, then with the proper choice of the inference method and proper choice of the kernel, and we can already gain improvement on the prediction accuracy. And compared to the classical linear method, you can see the blue scatter plot on the top. The pink scatter plot, it removes the nonlinear bias on extreme samples, and reduce the variation on the prediction, so which is very, very good. But we're also looking for some alternative approaches, like we stick to simple linear regression methods, but we're doing ensemble learning. We put many weak learners together with ADA boost, for example, or hierarchical structures to form a very strong learner at the end to produce better prediction, but we still have compact and very, very simple model. So we're still exploring the best fit algorithm for our data sets, and the main direction are either some non-parametric methods like kernel methods, or some efficient parametric methods like linear methods or neural network. Yes, thank you.
Christina Kadar, PhD student from ETH Zurich, the MTech department. So I'm looking at large-scale ubiquitous data for crime prediction, work that can be roughly categorized in the field of computational social science. Why? Because crime prevention is important, and because crime prediction is difficult still in 2017, and because the former can be achieved by means of the later. And evidence that this is not science fiction anymore are the various software packages used already in industry by police forces across the world. Knowing when and where crime is more likely to occur can be used for better planning of the patrols on the ground. Yet, crime is a very complex and dynamic system of offenders, victims, and the environment, and scholars in different disciplines are still investigating the three factors for predictive power. It should change. So traditionally, criminologists have looked at the standard set of socio-demographic data that were found to correlate with victimization. But census data has an intrinsic limitation in that it only offers a static, obsolete image of the city. On the other hand, local-based social networks like Foursquare, for example, give you location, time, and context of human activity, like shopping, commuting, working, going out, things that you already learned from Nuria that are important for crime. So my basic model would only be built on features that describe the residential population of an area from census data. And the ground truth is just past offenses in census tracts of New York City. The advanced models extend this by two further layers. One is points of interest in an area, for example, the venue's diversity of that area, and human dynamics factors, for example, the number of check-ins in food establishments on a normal weekend, as well as commuting data. So in terms of the results, I have found that ambient population significantly improved the resident population-based models. So in regression setup, with an ensemble of extra trees, for all types of offenses, I've managed to make the R-square beta from 35% to 66%. And especially for larcenies, this works much better, whereas for assaults, which is violent crime that is already well described by the census data, it didn't work that well. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm going to talk about machine learning for studying dark matter. So you might know that light always takes the shortest path. However, the shortest path in the universe isn't always straight. Massive objects, like a heavy galaxy, can bend light rays. If the conditions are just right, you can even see multiple images of the same object. This is called gravitational lensing. Most of the time, you don't see multiple objects. The object gets only slightly sheared, so the shape changes a little bit. This is what happens in this slice of universe. You can see that the light follows the yellow path through huge galaxy clusters to our telescope. Einstein told us that the shape distortion, what we call the shear, is linked to the mass distribution. And guess what? Most of the mass in the universe is in a strange form of matter that we don't yet understand, dark matter. So by studying galaxy shape, we're actually learning about dark matter. The intrinsic shape of a single galaxy is sheared by the dark and ordinary matter. A telescope degrades the image, and as we're looking at very distant objects, not much light is getting to us, so the final image is very noisy. We have to use large data sets to infer what the shear was. We're using data from the ground and from the sky, and this is what real data looks like. It's messy, you have stars that you have to remove, and you have to deal with all sorts of complications. There are millions of images like this, so you have to teach a computer how to process them for you, from the acquisition all the way to the scientific signal. To do this, we use neuronal network. We feed crude measurements of the shape to a multiplicative layer. The nonlinear combination of these inputs then go through a low-capacity network to get to the shear and then to the mass distribution. Before, when you measured the shear, you would get large error bars because the sample of galaxies that you were using was too small. Doing the same experiment today yields small random errors, smaller in fact than the systematic biases. We have become dominated by systematics. So we want to minimize those measurement biases. And so we can simulate a lot of data sets, and you can measure the crude estimate of the shape on those simulated but realistic data sets. And if you do a linear fit of those measurements in the bias versus shear frame, you see that there is a slope of 30%. The goal of current surveys is 0.2%. If we feed the data to our neuronal network, the bias gets reduced. However, using the standard cost mean square error cost function isn't sufficient. Minimizing the bias gets you to this 0.2% bias. I'm Thibaut Kinser, and this was a neural network for stealing dark matter. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I'm talking about a project that actually was talked about during the panel earlier today. Basically, the idea and the question that we are asking is how is it that online platforms such as Wikipedia and such as GitHub or Stack Overflow are able to collect reliable knowledge while we know that there is all this discussion of fake news and trolls and so on the web. Basically, these collaborative environments have been suffering from this problem of trolls for a very long time, and they developed certain tools that use the wisdom of the crowd to tackle these problems. So now what we did was basically formulate these tools that have become quite standard as basically one mathematical framework that can capture the variety of these types of refinements on these websites. For example, you can imagine on Wikipedia, people come and add some content, somebody else comes and removes it. Or on Stack Overflow, somebody asks a question, somebody else answers, and finally some answer gets verified. What we try to do is to use the historical traces on the web and on the logs of these websites to basically curate and extract a reliable notion of trustworthiness for the sources that are used and for the actual content that is produced. As an example here, you have a Wikipedia page for Barack Obama, which somebody comes in and on 17th of April adds a link to a Wikipedia from an Amazon book to the page and claims that this basically shows 12,000 lies that Obama has been telling people. So you have several components here. One is that somebody comes in and adds a piece of information. Somebody else basically comes in later on and removes it. So in this small interaction, what you get is basically a small process of refining an article. Somebody may come and include a good information, which lasts for a long time, and somebody else may come and add untrustworthy information. We use this combination of interaction to basically produce a framework that allows people to understand reliability of contents and also tells you something about the sources that are used on the web. This is applied on Wikipedia, on Stack Overflow, which later on you can come at the poster or ask me about it. Some of you already expressed some interest. Okay, so that was my talk about my project, but I want to actually talk about something else as well.
Over the weekend, while I was working on preparing for EPFL AML Days, I was also dealing with the news that is happening across the Pacific Ocean and is Atlantic Ocean, sorry, if you go around way. And this has cast a shadow on many people's lives. Some of you may have heard about it, some of you may know about it extensively. Actually, one of the former students at EPFL has been impacted by this decision that was made overnight to basically separate families, separate parents, and separate children from their families. Currently, there is not much information what's going on and what's going to be the consequences of these decisions, but there has been a momentum of people supporting a stop to this decision and a stop to this policy. I would like to invite you to reflect on these news. If you have colleagues abroad in the US, please inform them. If you have some influence, I will appreciate if you could use them to basically change these policies, because it has already affected so many people. With that, I would like to thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. It's in the nature of these rapid talks that we can take personalized questions, but you know now who they are, and you probably have already seen them at the posters, and it's a bit of a bug in the program. I think we should, in principle, have the talks first and then the posters later, but you know, we're baby steps. It's the first time. So thanks again. Big round of applause. And it's... So we're just a tad a little bit late, but we are now going into the last break. Please come back in half an hour for the last session. And one thing I want to mention is already keep some of the last days in January 2018 free. We're going to repeat this event, and we'd like to scale it up yet an order of magnitude. Okay, so we keep you posted. Thank you.